Hey YouTube, how's it going? Kevin Cleary with a knife video for you. And I'm going to have a bit of a discussion and sort of make some recommendations about carrying a fixed blade as your everyday carry knife. First I want to talk about sort of the pros and cons and some of the philosophical side of that, and then come back and make some recommendations about what works, what may not work, and especially what I found to be helpful, or maybe what to look for if you want to try carrying a fixed blade for your everyday carry knife. Alright, so first to start off, now that you kind of know how the video is going to break down, if you're only interested in recommendations, you could fast forward through the first part, but I hope you'll stick with me and listen to it. First thing I want to point out is that there are good reasons to carry an EDC. Now I'm not quite to the point of the actual plus and minuses yet, but maybe you live in a place where there's more restrictions on folding knives. A lot of places are like that. Maybe you do a job where there's dust or dirt in the air that could mess up the moving parts on a folding knife so that it doesn't fold or open or close very easily. You know, maybe you do other things with your knife that I would say you shouldn't do with a folding knife. You know, maybe you're putting some kind of lateral forces on it, like in this direction, and of course that's going to cause you some issues if you're using your knife that way. A folding knife is just not going to hold up to that for very, very long. So there are some good reasons to want an EDC outside of just some of the more specific pluses and minuses that I'll get into when it comes to carrying them. So what are those? Like, you know, you say, okay, Kevin, I do feel like I would be better served by a fixed blade for my job or for whatever I'm going to use a knife for. What are the drawbacks? You know, what are the advantages? And so let's hit the drawbacks first. Okay, I think there's one glaring drawback, and then there are a couple of sort of secondary ones. And the glaring drawback, I'm going to use the SE3 to demonstrate this. The glaring drawback is simply size and weight. Okay, the SE3 is a fairly small knife. You know, I would call it a medium-sized fixed blade. It's a very handy knife. It's, you know, full capability knife, but of course it's smaller than, say, the SE4, 5, 6, smaller than the BK7. You know, there's lots of, you know, it's definitely on the small side of fixed blade knives. But it's still much bigger than practically any folding knife that I could show you. Okay, even the military, which is known to be quite a large knife, the SE3 is quite a lot bigger. And even though it's bigger in terms of what you have to carry with you, it's still smaller once you have it open. Okay, if you're comparing these two in terms of blade length and handle real estate, the military is much larger. Okay, so that is certainly a consideration that has to be made in terms of whether or not you should carry a fixed blade. Is you're carrying, generally speaking, you're going to be carrying more size and weight for the same as or even less blade length. All right, and that becomes even more apparent when you look at something like the Hest, which is only a 3-inch blade, or you know, Becker Necker. Now with these, you start to come full circle because these are fairly small, lightweight knives, and there are a number of variations on this, but I'll come back to that in a second when I start making recommendations. So size and weight is obviously going to be a problem because it doesn't fold, right? That means you've got a fairly substantial thing to deal with. Okay, so that's number one. Probably the biggest barrier is just simply the fact that it doesn't fold, therefore you've got to deal with this whole thing rather than something much smaller like this. Okay? Now, in addition to that, there's some other considerations. You've got to consider what your environment is. Some places you could pull this knife out and no one would care. No one would bat an eyelash. Okay? But some places they would, where if you had this, which was a folding knife, no one would think a thing about it. Now you could say, yeah, Kevin, this one has a longer blade, you know, it's more tactical, whatever. I'm not sure if that's true of this knife per se. But my point is, people expect you to have, if you're carrying a pocket knife, they expect it to be a folding knife, okay? They're not used to seeing fixed blades as the knives that people carry around with them everywhere. I think there are good reasons to carry a fixed blade, but other people may not be comfortable with that, or they may not be, at the very least, familiar with it, okay? And so that's another sort of element. Finally, the last thing is just convenience, okay? Now, I'm not saying there are some fixed blades that are very convenient. I would recommend, I would suggest this Becker is very convenient. The Minimalist, which I have over here, hold on. The Minimalist, very convenient, and you could wear it with almost anything, okay? You could probably go to the gym wearing this or go running and not be negatively impacted by carrying it. But it's not quite as easy, it's not quite as comfortable as something like the Flash 2, which of course very, very lightweight, very easy to put in the pocket of track pants or workout shorts or something like that if you're doing something like that. The Benchmade 531 is even more slim and lightweight, and so it does offer you, quite a bit of blade length and size in a very small, very lightweight package, which can be very versatile, okay? Doesn't matter what you were wearing, whether you're wearing pajama pants, you could still carry this knife and have no problems with it. You could almost carry this in like a Speedo bathing suit, I don't recommend any of you wearing a Speedo bathing suit. You're certainly not gonna see me wearing one, but if you did, you could probably still carry this knife, okay? Now, with even a fairly small fixed blade like the Tops T-Bow, you're gonna have a hard time carrying this in certain pieces of clothing, okay? In certain situations, it's going to be tough to carry. All right, so those are the main drawbacks as far as I can tell. Convenience, public perception, and just sheer size and weight. Now on the other side, I think there are some benefits, okay? Benefits like, number one, speed, okay? If you need a knife quickly, maybe it's you're a first responder, you need to cut a seat belt, or maybe you're a hiker and you need to be able to quickly get out your knife and cut. If you're a diver, right, there's a risk of being tangled up and you need to get something out to cut very quickly. A fixed blade is a big benefit along those lines, okay? You pull it out, and as soon as you do, it's immediately ready to cut, okay? Now, even a knife that is designed to be fast, like the ZT-0630, I'm going to fake it with my finger. Let's say I pulled this out of my pocket, waved it open. Now notice my hand is down here. I've got to reposition my grip in order to use it. With a fixed blade, all the fixed blades I have, and I've kind of tried this out, every fixed blade that I have with me here, except for the SOG, and even the SOG is mostly there, the Seal Pup, because of this button, it becomes a little slower, but you could get a custom kydex sheet for this. Otherwise though, every other fixed blade that I have here, my hand is where it needs to be to use the knife when I extract it, okay? So I grab the knife to take it out of the sheath, well, I'm already basically in position to cut. Okay, so if speed is an issue or if speed is a concern, there's nothing faster than a fixed blade, okay? So number one, speed. Number two, durability. If you are doing some task that involves any kind of prying, now I'm not promising you won't break the tip off this knife, but you're far less likely to break the knife in general if you have a fixed blade versus a folder, okay? And some fixed blades are built for that kind of prying type work. And let's see, I've got a couple here. DPX Hest, it's extremely thick out here at the tip. You could easily pry with this knife and not have too much to worry about. Another even more extreme example is the Ratmandu. This thing is literally a sharpened pry bar. You could easily pry with this knife and have no problems whatsoever. So, utility. Now, durability is another element of this. They kind of go together, but let's say you're doing something, you are hiking and you need to clean up some food, or maybe you're doing bushcraft survival skills and you want to build a trap, a fish trap in a river. Well, you've got to make some cuts and there's a good chance of getting your knife wet. So you could pull out this and you could definitely make your cuts with this and you'd be fine. However, the chances of getting water in here are fairly good. And if you actually submerge the knife in water, Now you've got an even bigger problem. You've got to figure out how to dry all the insides. And if you're camping or in a survival situation, you're hiking, you know, you don't really want to pull this whole thing apart and dry it all out right then and there. I guess you could put it in the sun and let the sun evaporate the water, and that can be pretty effective. You could spray WD-40 in there. But if you just carried a fixed blade to begin with, you know, let's use the SE6 for example. If you just, this was the knife you had, you did your cutting, put it back in the and before you put it back in the sheath, you have full access to the whole knife. Okay, there's nothing, there's no moving parts, there's nothing to take apart. You just dry it off with a towel and it's dry. Okay, and put it away. It's like all of a sudden I can't do it. So utility, speed, durability, I think those are all legitimate reasons for carrying a fixed blade over a folder. Now, do you need that much utility? Do you need that much durability? Probably not. Probably most of you are just like me and you just like knives and you want some variety in your EDC. So let's ask finally the general question, do I recommend it? Do I think it's a good idea? And talk about some practical ways to do it or make it easier. First of all, I've got to say, you know, I love folders, okay? My primary collection is definitely a folding knife collection. I've got some fixed blades as you've been seeing here, but most often every day I carry a folder. So I'm not trying to convince any of you folder fans like me to switch, okay? But guess what? I do regularly like to carry a fixed blade, and often the way I do it is to pair a large folder with a smaller fixed blade, okay? Or vice versa, a larger fixed blade, maybe the Hess. I would consider this, now that's one limitation. I would consider this large for a fixed blade, and probably the general public will too. Obviously, other knives that are similar in size, so the Hess is smaller than the American Lawman. I would consider this medium for a folder in terms of an EDC folder. And so there is this limitation where if I was carrying this, I would probably pair it with something like this, a small, light, more pocket type knife, rather than some kind of tactical folder, okay? And I do this pretty frequently, so I can tell you, you know, I like it, I enjoy it, and it works. But let's now get to some practical considerations, okay? Starting with, and I think for EDCing a knife, the most important consideration is the sheath. And the reason that's the most important is not so much because of the sheath itself. So I've got, you know, this one's plastic, this one's Kydex, this one is plastic as well, just a different kind of plastic. It doesn't really matter too much to me, although some plastic will dull your knife, just be aware of that. And that's more about sheath construction. But what matters is variability, okay? So this sheath is a good example. Because of the way the holes are and because of the way it's put together, you have quite a bit of variability in how you orient it. You can pretty much orient this knife any direction you want and clip it to anything you want, and that's what you need to look for in a fixed blade for EDC, because you're probably going to find the first couple of tries you don't find it comfortable. Okay, so maybe the first time you mount this in a fairly traditional, you know, on the hip, up, tip down configuration, I don't find that very comfortable for me. So as soon as you try to get in a car, do anything, it's in the way. Rather, I prefer on the small of my back attached to my belt. And I reach behind, extract the knife, and you're good to go. Now, that works well for me, but maybe it won't work for you. Maybe you'll try that and you'll much prefer it in a different place. Maybe you'll prefer sort of a in the front type of kidney carry, or you know, you'll prefer it clipped to your jacket or something else, okay? So variability is the thing that you basically want to look for in a sheath, so that you have as many options as you might want. And I mean, think about it first. You don't want to buy a knife and think, oh, I have no idea how I'm going to carry it. Generally, you know, especially now that I've got some experience, I know I can look at a knife and go, I would want to carry that knife in this configuration. And so you'll probably get to that point as well, but just make sure the sheath works for the configuration that you feel comfortable carrying the knife in, okay? So that's number one. Number two, use different methods. So one of the things I like to be concerned about is concealability. I don't want everyone to see that I have a fixed blade. I have this setup, which I really like. I loop this around a belt loop, put this through, so that this is kind of hooked onto my belt. Then I put this in a pocket or in the waistband of my pants, and I can easily get it out, The sheath stays where it is, attached to my pants. I make my cut, grab the sheath, put it back in, and put this back. You guys know I got that from the CRKT Obaki, okay? And I think that's a great knife. And that's kind of where I stole that from, but works really well. Now maybe you'll like a neck knife. That's one of the things that I found out. I've tried all of these that are marketed as neck knives. I've tried them and don't really like them, okay? So that's my recommendations about carry. There's a number of different ways you can do it. Probably most of you are going to settle on some kind of belt carry, and I will say that's more comfortable for me. Now, what about the knife itself? And here's some recommendations, and I would say these knives or something like these knives will probably work for most people. Probably my favorite is the SE3. It's big enough to be comfortable, it's small enough to EDC, and I think it really kind of hits a sweet spot. The blade, steel, and the grind are fairly thin, so it slices well, which works for lots of different EDC tasks. Close to that would be the Hest, okay? Again, similar size and shape to the 3. I'll do a comparison of them eventually. The blade grind is considerably thicker on this, so it doesn't slice as well, but you can usually make this work for most tasks. The Becker Necker, very, very nice, BK11. The blade on this, the edge geometry is very good and it cuts really well. Now there is a variation on this called the Escobar that has the SE Azula handle, which is a little longer, and that does make for a very nice blade as well. Any variation of this or the Azula as well would work pretty well as an EDC fixed blade. There are handles for this, but I like to carry it in my waistband sometimes, so the handles got in the way for that, so I didn't like it. So those are sort of what I would consider the medium. Those would be full-size EDC knives, kind of. Okay, the Azula is a little small. I had 3 that I planned to show you. I forgot one. But the Tops Tebow is a great sort of smaller EDC fixed blade. Obviously, the very popular, very well-known CRKT Minimalist, again, is a very popular EDC fixed blade. The other one that you guys know I love if you've seen the review is the Brose Blades Silent Soldier. Not the flipper, I'll just use the flipper to hold its place. Not the flipper, but the fixed blade. I love that thing, and I will say this, I've held both and tried both. I prefer it considerably more than the SOG Snarl, which I found to be very uncomfortable and tough to use. Okay, so there you go, guys. That's sort of my those are my recommendations for EDCing a fixed blade. Find the way to carry it that works for you. Knives that have, you know, around 3-inch blade lengths usually work pretty well. If you get much bigger than that, it begins to be a little awkward, especially if you're gonna get that knife out. And the other thing I would say is don't give up on folders. I still love folders, and they work really, really well for everyday carry, and that's why so many people use them. But if you feel like you'd like to try a fixed blade, if you already own one and you've thought about EDCing it, I think it's totally doable and totally workable as sort of part of your everyday carry system. All right, hope you enjoyed the video. There we go. Couldn't find the remote there for a second. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions or comments, go ahead and put them in the comments below, and we'll talk to you soon.